The next thing that we're going to do on this page is we're going to turn all of these pictures into more of a gallery. We want these to be side by side. We're going to put frames on them and make them appear a little bit smaller depending on the size of the browser. I'll go back into my SASS file, and before we get into it, let me just show you the HTML. This is an article with a class of gallery. I have an H2 followed by an unordered list that has list items with image tags that contain the images. We'll start off by making a rule for the gallery article, so I'm going to use .gallery as my selector. We're going to set the width to 80%. I'm going to set my margin to 0 in auto, and we're going to need to tell the float to be none because remember that articles are being floated up here. So this article I don't want to float, so I'm going to tell the article on this particular one to be none. And then we'll go ahead and we'll make a rule for any direct descendants that are H2s, and I'm going to apply a color to those. We'll use our darken color function. I'm going to set my font size to 2ems and the margin bottom to 0.5ems. If we save and we look at this in the browser, you can see that here is the text that we're currently seeing. So this is just styling this H2 text. Then I'm going to make a rule for the UL, and we'll set this margin and padding to 0. Again, it has some inherited rules that we want to get rid of in this specific instance, so we're going to go ahead and do that. I will then make a rule for my LI items, and I'm going to tell these to display as inline block so that they'll appear side by side. I'm going to add some padding settings to those. We'll add some margin, and let's have the margin be 0 for the top, 0 for the right and left, and we'll just add a 1% margin on the bottom. I'm going to give these a background color, and I'll use my lighten function on those. And we'll set the width of these to 25% so that we can fit 4 on a line. And I'm going to go ahead and use a border of solid 6 pixels, lighten. We'll use our ocean color and we'll tell it to lighten by 50%. And finally, I'm going to add a max width on my images so that they act responsively. Let's take a look at this. Here we are in the browser, and you can see that my images are smaller, they have this border, they're starting to fit together. They aren't displaying at a 4-up mode though, they're only displaying at a 3-up mode. And the reason that they aren't displaying 4-up is because I'm using that inline block. When you use inline block elements, there's always going to be a little bit of white space between those elements. That space ends up being about 4 pixels. We discussed it in one of our previous movies. In this particular part of our page, we're going to address it a little bit differently though. So currently the LIs are 25% for the width, plus they have that extra white space, and that's exceeding the 100% width that they can fit in. So it's breaking our layout. What we're going to use here is we're going to use one possible fix. The fix is to set the font size on the gallery to 0. Now when I did make the font size 0, you can see what happened to the H2. The H2 is a child of the gallery, so now its font size is going to be set to 0, even though we set it to have a font size of 2ems. 2ems times 0 is still nothing. So what we need to do is we need to change the font unit from ems to rems. Rems is the root font size in ems. So if we just make that one change, now you can see that our H2 is going to display and come back. Now that my images are displaying in a 4-up manner, I realize that I want a little bit of spacing in between them. So I'm going to go back into the rules that we already have, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to add some spacing on the right. So I'll change my margin setting here from 0 on the right to 2% on the right, 1% on the bottom, and 0 for the left. Now this is indeed going to create spacing, but of course now they don't fit as a 4-up mode because the math is no longer working. So we're going to have to adjust our math as well. And I think now that I see this, I'm going to change the bottom margin spacing to 2% as well. So currently our LI elements are having a width of 25%. All of the LI elements also have a 2% spacing on the right. So that's giving us about 8% additional spacing that we don't need. The last or the fourth item, we don't really care if it has margin on the right because it's going to be the fourth one every time. So let's use an nth child selector just to remove that first. I'm going to use and the pseudo class of nth child, and we'll pass on 4n here since it's the fourth one, and we're just going to tell it to have a margin right of 0. And you can see if we look in the browser that now the margin right of the fourth item is no longer an issue. We still aren't getting these side by side, and that's because the math still doesn't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the width from being 25% to being a calculation. So what I could do here is I could use a calculation of 100%, which is the total width available, and then I need to subtract 3 of the 2% right margin. So we're going to have to nest some additional calculations since we want this part of the calculation to occur first. I'm going to do 3 times 2%. And then we want to take the results of whatever this is and divide that by 4. So I'm going to wrap these in another set of parentheses, and once we have multiplied our 3 times 2% and then subtracted that from 100%, we're going to go ahead and we're going to divide the entire thing by 4. If we save and we look in the browser, you can now see that our images are displaying in a 4-up mode. And this is responsive because we're using percentages. The images are going to grow and shrink depending on how large or small my page is. Being able to use this mathematical calculation is very flexible. In order to make this a little bit more robust, we're going to look at some of the other things that we've discussed in the class and use some variables so that we can make it easier to make changes at some point in the future. And then finally, we'll turn this whole thing into a mixin. But we'll do that in the next exercise.